So if you look at it at the African Union level, I remember when I was the champion of the reform process, there are things that were discussed on the continent. For example, the peace and security facility that was put in place. Because it was put in place to avoid being fully dependent on external funders, because that has been the case. In fact, this is similar to what happens in other areas in different countries. We find we depend so much on the external partners and forget ourselves to put in place what we really have to do and can do.
This is the journey to One Africa.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much for taking some time to talk to us here. You have the private sector from the continent and beyond, the people that drive the economies across the continent. And President Ramaphosa, you have the privilege of chairing the G20 this year. And there are many people here, private sector, governments, who are hoping that because you're in this pole position, you can advocate for the extension of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, quota-free, tariff-free access to the US market, in a time when the opposite is happening. And in your case, have you even been able to convince President Trump to show up?
Well, there's still a long time from now to November, and a number of discussions will be ensuing. And so the G20 process consists of 130 meetings the whole year, and we participate with a number of countries, and the US also participates, and leading to that summit where we will, as South Africa, hand over to the United States. One would hope that it will all happen seamlessly and in an ordinary and well-managed manner. So we will see how this whole process will end up. But we are excited as South Africa and very privileged to be heading the G20 for the very first time on the African continent, and we're particularly pleased that our own continent as a whole, through the AU, is now a member and will be participating fully as we get the world to discuss our priorities and our theme, which is solidarity, equality as well. And as we do all that, we expect that our key priorities will become top of mind in the discussions that are currently taking place leading up to the Leaders Summit in November.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we are joined on the stage as well by His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of Mauritania. I'll come back to that in just a second, President Ramaphosa. But President Kagame, when we spoke in February, at the beginning, shortly after President Trump took over power, you said you supported the cuts to aid, that we as Africans have to be self-dependent. We can't rely on other people to fund our development. A lot more has happened since then that in some ways threaten our economic advantage as Africans. Do you still support largely what President Trump is doing in resetting our relationship with America and forcing us as Africans to step up?
Well, thank you, Rari. I think we have to put everything in a context. Whatever President Trump has decided, or whatever anybody else will decide in the near future, there is a history to how we've been going about things for decades as Africa. So it isn't like we should just wake up one morning and because of what somebody has done that affects us, we should have been building up the momentum in terms of what we need to do to make Africa self-dependent and resilient, and also in how Africa works with other continents and other countries. So that is the context. So in this case, it is as well that President Trump decided to do what he did, if that was only to add to many other reminders or things that should wake us up to, as Africa, be able to do what we ought to do. And there are many opportunities. We always talk about potential of our continent, but when do we realize really what this potential is all about in reality? I think that has always been the question. And that comes back to us as a continent, as a people of this continent, to take the bull by its horns and deal with the problem. So we can't keep depending on what others are saying or doing about us. We need to be working with each other and other countries on the global stage that offer what we need, and we as well offer what they need. I think this is the context.
You have been an advocate, President Kagame, of reforming the African Union. Is it, as currently set up, the vehicle for us, our aspirations as Africans, when, for instance, you've been critical of its role in mediating in the conflict that you have with your neighbor in the DRC, in the Rwanda process, in the Nairobi process, and the best results appear to have come from one meeting you had with President Tshisekedi in Qatar. So the African Union failed there and Qatar succeeded.
Well, I think there are several efforts going on at the same time. That's the problem. And even that one we are talking about, whether it is Qatar or the US, or we can't say we have succeeded. Everyone is trying. And again, it comes back to us, really. If you look at what we've been doing on our continent, much progress has been made. I think we can't say nothing has been done, generally. Whether it was to do with the reforms, and I think Africans have come together. They have defined things and speak with one voice increasingly. There is significant progress. But most of these developments that have been happening in the last decade, as I said, are reminders that there are things we need to do that we haven't done. So if you look at it at the African Union level, I remember when I was the champion of the reform process, there are things that were discussed on the continent. For example, the peace and security facility that was put in place. Because it was put in place to avoid being fully dependent on external funders, because that has been the case. In fact, this is similar to what happens in other areas in different countries. We find we depend so much on the external partners and forget ourselves to put in place what we really have to do and can do. So that is progress. And then, so in terms of peace and security, and again, you look at the whole continent, you find there are many trouble spots in different areas. All kinds of efforts going on, back and forth, succeeding in some places, not succeeding in others, and continued efforts going on. Again, these are some of the areas, because of the past and how we have handled our own affairs, that we are all of a sudden reminded that we can't do all things by ourselves,
right,
and revert to these partners In other words, in any case, it doesn't, even if we're able to do things ourselves, we still have to bring in partners who have what to offer. But we have, as Africa, to be able to define which direction you want to take and not entirely depend on what these people are contributing.
All right. President Ramaphosa, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, on the peace process, particularly in the conflict that's been happening on our continent and particularly in the Eastern DRC, I'd like to compliment rather than contradict what President Kagame is saying. The processes that have been happening on the continent, either the Nairobi process or the Rwanda process or the AU process, have been very, very essential in building a foundation of peacemaking and also confidence building, up to and including agreements that have been reached for a ceasefire between the belligerents, up to and including the withdrawal of, say, the SADC forces as they are withdrawing now. I mean, people may think that President Kagame and I are in conflict, and some of you may have thought that there's going to be fireworks as we're sitting close to each other.
It is wonderful to see you agreeing and not contradicting each other. You're all thinking it.
So all these efforts have been building a very strong and firm foundation. And of course, because our countries on the continent are not islands, we don't live alone in this God-given world or planet. We have to interface and interact with others. So whatever contribution others can make who are extra African is important. But in the end, we must also remember the principle that we have adopted as Africa, that African problems or African solutions for African problems. In the end, and President Kagame knows this, whatever discussions are happening, in the end has to be endorsed, signed off, and owned and appropriated by us as Africans. Because this is our continent. We are in charge of the future of this continent, and we must build peace ourselves because we live on this continent, and therefore we have a deep responsibility to ensure that peace does indeed prevail. And what they are doing with Qatar, US, or whoever is part of the peace-building process, but it is inherently African. And we must thank and applaud those who are assisting because they are our partners, but we are the owners of the whole process ourselves as Africans.
President Ramaphosa used to address family meetings during COVID where he'd have tough conversations with South Africans. And I think, was there a family meeting between you and President Kagame where you had this tough conversation?
Well, we have family meetings unbeknown to many people who see certain things happening just 2 seconds, 3 seconds. We have family meetings between the two of us, ongoing discussions, and on a speed dial with each other to discuss all manner of things. So forget the psychedelic things that happen in the air. Focus on what we do together to build the peace process on our continent.
Thank you, Your Excellency. President Ghazouani of Mauritania, you have in recent months made some big announcements directly involving the private sector. You signed a new public-private partnership law in 2024 in November. You had a framework with the OPEC Fund in January of this year, and the DREAM project with the World Bank, which you launched in March. Does this shift reflect a change in your philosophy toward the private sector? And how will you be leveraging these projects to energize Mauritanian businesses?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, it is true that in Mauritania, we are in a vision that gives a capital importance of the private sector in the creation of jobs, creation of added value, and make the private sector a locomotive of economic development. Indeed, you know that the pressure has increased on the government for the accomplishment of their mission, and we are actually trying to mobilize public resources. And this reality is obliging the private sector to be a key sector that is essential for financing and also the provision of services in favor of development. We are convinced that the private sector cannot fully play this role if the states is not committed and putting necessary reforms to build an environment that will be more attractive, that will guarantee the legal security of the investments, whether at the national level, international level, more modernization of infrastructure, promotion of human resources. So it's only that the project that you mentioned when you in your question, that is actually confirming our willingness to favor emergence of a dynamic private sector that will bring more growth and also employment as well. Now, today, the private sector has the possibility to intervene as a self-producer of its needs in energy, and also sell the surplus to public companies of electricity through key tools that favor the development of the SME, like the new code of electricity, the new law that we just put together, impact the pact of energy, reform of the public market, the new code of investment, and etc. So our national pact as well of energy that was presented in Dar es Salaam in January during the launching of the M300 program. This is for the private sector to be more involved, and we are around $28.5 billion, and on the 2.5 billion that we projected. So this is a important commitment to allow the production of 100 and 200 megawatt of electricity, IPP and PPP. So now regarding the new agreement, the partnership that we signed with the fund that you mentioned for the amount of $120 million is a support that is directed in the IPP and also the DREAM project as well of $181 million that we signed with the World Bank, that we allow also through the battery of storage to reinforce the capacity of Somalek, and also benefiting a technology and also an expertise developed on the private sector. So globally, to conclude, our economic and social developments can be increased through a dynamic private sector with more ambition and committed with the public action. Thank you very much.
And Honorable Vice President, a few days ago, the Africanist CEO Forum surveyed some of the private business leaders who are in this room and who are participating, and they asked them whether or not they felt that the African Continental Free Trade Area, or like en français, was having an impact on their activities. Only 17% of the business leaders they surveyed said yes. Are you surprised by these results? Only 17% think the AFCFTA has an impact on their business. And how do you interpret that? That level of, I guess, pessimism.
Thank you very much. I would first like to express my gratitude to the President Ouattara that allowed me to be with his colleagues here in this panel. You mentioned that in the private sector, we are realizing that things are not quite as we wish that they will be. I think that what was mentioned earlier is so important. The most important is governance, because governance, as we mentioned, is what allows to create the necessary framework for the evolution of the activities, private activities. And I will not go back on what was already said, but what we all wish is that the expression will be done. So it means that the people that need this governance that will be directed in a certain way should say it precisely, because the needs are multiple and are multiform, and is through the collaboration of everyone in all sectors of activities that need coverage, and we should work accordingly to our needs. So I think that if the governance is good, and that the companies and the private sector is able to find ideas, the performances will be good, and this is what we are seeking for. So here is what we should seek. Exactly, the good governance that goes through what the private sector needs as a sign, as value, as need, and that can allow to go further in the result that we are looking for. This is what I can say globally. And this exercise that we are having, for example, is simply something important to help the private sector to provide and also exchange and reach the objectives that we set. And this only can be done if, one, the willingness is there, secondly, the conditions are met, and three, that the performance will allow to reach and meet our objectives. So in Côte d'Ivoire, for example, we put in place a national plan of development on 5 years, and that was also renewed. So this plan takes into consideration all the concerns that the private sector have in order to be performant. And the results are, of course, the level of what we were looking for, a rate of growth around 7% per year, which we were able to reach, and the performances that go beyond what we even expected. So here is what we should be looking for. Thank you very much.
Are you surprised that only 17% of these business leaders feel that the AFCFTA has impacting their business?
Yes, well, it is...
Because you're a big advocate of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes, which I'm about to speak about. It's quite concerning if that is the perception. You know, as I walked in with President Ouattara, President Kagame, and others, as I entered this room, I could smell money. And I welcome this opportunity to sit here and look at people who have money or control money. And as I look at all of you, and I say, wow, these are people who control a lot of money on the continent.
Right.
And I want them to smell the coffee and go beyond their 17% skepticism, because the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a fundamentally transformative mechanism that was adopted by the leaders of the continent. And we should recognize and applaud the fact that the political leaders under the aegis of the AU saw wisdom, and led by President Isufu, and President Kagame was leading the reform process, they saw wisdom in scaling the fortunes of Africa up and moving us just beyond just talking about politics and the unity of the continent, and wanting to put in place the real building blocks of what will support that unity and the progress on our continent. And that was about the economic growth of the continent through engendering trade, and that's why the African Continental Free Trade Area was adopted. So it is an engine of growth, and through it we'd like the private sector to embrace it, to participate in it, because what it does, it gives the African continent an opportunity to integrate, and it gives business people the opportunity to see the 1.4 billion people market on our continent, and a GDP of the entire continent adding up to $3.4 trillion. Now, with this agreement, we're then able to get the private sector working with the public sector to embark on meaningful projects such as infrastructure, because for trade to have meaning and to happen on our continent, infrastructure projects must be embarked upon. Roads must be built. Our airlines must work properly. Our ports must work properly. Our rail network must work properly. And this is where the private sector can then come and partner with the public sector, where we can work together. And the public sector is keen, having established or inaugurated the African Continental Free Trade Area, in integrating the continent. I saw the integration of the continent during COVID-19, when together as a continent we integrated ourselves when it came to personal protective equipment, and we set up a supplies organization or platform where we bought things together as a continent. And then we came to vaccines, when the West just kept on supplying vaccines to us, and President Kagame, President Macky Sall, myself, and many others then said, we want to make our own vaccines. And then we started a process of integration of things like vaccines into Africa. So we started seeing integration. And what has that led to? A number of businesses being established. So what I'm saying is, we would like the private sector to follow in tandem with the public sector to embrace the AFCTA and also be active participants. Now, what the public sector will do is to de-risk, particularly when it comes to infrastructure projects, to de-risk a number of these projects through, obviously, the sovereign financial systems that we have in each country, and allow the private sector to participate. So we are twins, we are pods, and we need to work together. And I'd like to see that 17% skepticism whittling down.
Right.
This is a platform that the private sector must be active in. And the other benefit they will get is that it leads to institutional capacity improvement. It bolsters our skills base, the talent that the continent should have. It opens up trading regions beyond just the regions, but to the whole continent. And this is precisely what we are going to be advocating also at the G20. When it comes to things like critical minerals, we want a critical minerals accord that will enable all of us to manage our critical minerals properly. And we can only do so when the public sector and the private sector move together and work together. So your money should be put to good use. We must not just smell it. You must come and put it to real good use. Thank you.
Thank you. President Ramaphosa, these people are sold. You're preaching to the choir in some ways. We all believe in the dream of the FCFTA. But the borders are closed. The flights are expensive. We can't get visas to South Africa.
Now, don't be too personal. But the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is going to be the pathfinder, the road opener for all that. It's going to enable all that. The movement of goods, the movement of people, the issue of visas is currently being addressed. And the pace might be slow, but it is happening, and it is going to happen. It's going to open the floodgate for economic activity on our continent. And I would say, watch this space. It is going to happen.
Thank you, sir. President Kagame, another issue. There are several candidates here for president of the African Development Bank. And this is happening when we just learned recently that President Donald Trump intends to cut about $555 million to the US, the concessional window. So they're going to take over an organization that still needs a lot of funding. But can we do it? And is it the right body to develop our continent, even when the EU, the US, and others are reducing how much they contribute to it? And this, I guess, is related to your earlier point, we can't rely on others.
Well, again, let me start from where my brother, President Ramaphosa, left off. One, we can pat each other's back and be happy that we are making progress, which is true. The continent is making progress. Where we are now is not where we were 30 years ago. But at the same time, we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. And we don't need to blame anybody else. We just need to do what we have to do. Because I believe we can do better, we can do more, and we can do many things together. And that will take us very far. This kind of conversation, and what has been said by all of us most of the time, has been going on more or less forever. We talk about Africa's potential, we talk about, the partnership between the private sector and the public sector. As has been said, it's about resources, it's about money, it's about what we do in terms of investment. So we can't just appeal to the private sector to be part of that process, to join with the public sector and do what we need to do without incentivizing the private sector. Because there is a lot government can do to create these incentives. And that, it's about regulation, it's about laws, it's about all kinds of support that, and of course, a secure environment. We talk about good governance, we talk about earlier accountability was being talked about. These are real things that matter, and we should be making sure. If we don't, even to the question you've raised, we want to be making progress. Because, for example, let me go straight to the question. The cutting of budgets, cutting of aid, cutting of all kinds of things. And all of a sudden, we Africans, we wake up to this reality when it has been there so many times before, and we start scrambling. What do we do? No, what we need to do is what we should have done many years ago, and still we can do it. There is a mentality out there, it's sort of a mindset in our continent that somebody out there is going to foot the bill of our development. And that has undermined our effort to contribute as much as we can ourselves for our own development. So what we need to do, I mean, we need to do what we started doing. The frustration here for me is, we talked about how I championed the reform and worked with many other leaders on different subjects. But there is a sense of frustration that what we have agreed, even at a continental level, involving all leaders and how regional communities should work, with the AU at a continental level, is not implemented. The systems are so bureaucratic that you imagine they live in another world, not this one that is so harsh to us that we need to be doing certain things certain ways without expecting that somebody will always be kind to us, and that's what we depend on almost forever. I'm saying this out of experience. I have lived in my country, and I see many other African countries go through that. So on one hand, there is everything in our hands to do whatever we need to do and benefit from that. On the other, we are expecting that somebody else will come and do what we need for ourselves.
Right.
So how can this go on forever? We have the knowledge, we have the vision, we have everything. We have resources, and we have organizations, we organize, we have. Africa should be far ahead of where we are now. And we shouldn't take any comfort that some progress has been made here or there. We just need to do what we have to do.
Right.
Yes, and we have all the means to do it. So we are actually our own problems. So if we addressed ourselves to this matter, that we need to work together, that we need to, we export raw materials, all right?
Right.
And then import
the finished product.
Finished products. We export talent and then get experts coming to give us all kinds of things. Why don't we retain this talent and let the talent to do what we need them to do for ourselves? So it's a much deeper conversation you must have, and sometimes if we have to wash our dirty linen in public for the sake of making progress, then we still have to do it. But there is a sense of frustration that you cannot simply be comfortable about. So, again, what President Ramaphosa just said, for example, the efforts here and there about our situation when COVID struck. After that, we again, I was given the responsibility to champion the domestic financing for health.
Right.
Some of these things we can, and you find in the mindsets of many people, they expect that somebody will do the funding. We can't tap into our own resources to the level that is required and to do exactly the things we agreed we should do, and some of us have tried to do, but it's not enough.
Right.
We need as many countries get involved on our continent as possible.
All right.
So I think there is more conversation to be had, and we should have it, maybe not on the stage like this. We need to be brutally honest with each other somewhere in different rooms, and I can promise you we are going to contribute to that.
All right. In fact, let me ask President Gazwani about that, because you just finished your term as the chair of the African Union only 3 months ago. Do you consider the African Union still the vehicle for defending the interests of African countries when there's so much frustration about how slow and bureaucratic? You hear how President Kagame is frustrated. What was your experience, really quickly as we're out of time, Your Excellency?
Thank you. Yes, in February 2024, I had the huge honor to be at the presidency of our continental organization of the African Union. I would like once again to express my gratitude towards my African brothers for this trust that they gave me. And as you mentioned in your question, my mandate just expired three months ago. And at the end of this mandate, I feel a pride for what I accomplished as a duty of serving the African Union in the world context that is also really complex. And we saw all the regional and world tension. So my vision of this responsibility was always to carry our continent in its rich diversity, its history, in its assets, and also in the conscience of its weaknesses, and as a major actor at the international scene. It was to commit Africa in a trajectory of a renewal to meet the aspiration and also the deep concerns of our population. So this renewal that I am talking about can only be done through a collaboration. So and from in my opinion, we should reinforce the cohesion of our institution in Africa, and also going from the conference of the head of states up to the specialized agencies of our organization, while hoping a coordination ensuring an harmonized coordination of the different structures. We are working collectively in a same direction with a shared intelligence. Africa needs more and more a strong African Union that is more consistent, that is performing very well, and also functional. It's only with that we will be able to have some important results with our international challenges and also in the global decisions that, as my brother Kagame mentioned. For me, during my mandates, I worked to set some foundation of necessary reforms, because what we said earlier is that, let's say that let's say that we put together good reforms. It's only in that framework that we can work. As I mentioned, I put necessary reforms to overcome the challenges that are not allowing us to have some necessary and strong improvement. So we clarify and implemented an electoral process that is more transparent, equal at the Commission, and that our executive body is actually working on that aspect. Now we are having a rotation. The pairing skills is a really important principle that we should always be maintaining. I think we were able to have a consensus on the definition of the different profiles required within the Commission. Our objective was to build an executive founded on efficiency with the agenda of 2063. With my colleague, the President Ruto, in the continuity of the work that we were able to realize with rigor, with skills, with my brother present here, President Kagame, we established a clear agenda to complete this process of reform. So I have hope that this process will be completed in few months. It's in the same spirit that we also work to prepare and formalize the participation of the African Union at G20, and as a member, the essential step in the construction of the strategic international partnership. And to conclude, from my experience, I have a strong conviction is that our future will go through inclusive institutions that are performing very well, that are represented. It's only in this direction that we acted with determination during my presidency. Thank you very much.
Out of time, but I would be committing journalistic malpractice if I don't ask President Ramaphosa this. As we speak, 49 white Afrikaner refugees are on their way to the United States. They will be received by the government of President Trump. What is your reaction to this?
Well, we've raised our own concern because those people who are being enticed to go to the United States do not fit the definition of a refugee. A refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution, or economic persecution. And
that's what the United States says they're undergoing in South Africa. That's why they've opened the door for them.
Yes, and they don't fit that bill. They don't fit that description. And I had a conversation with President Trump on the phone, and he said, what's happening down there? And I said, President, what you've been told by those people who are opposed to transformation back home in South Africa is not true. And I added to him, I said, we were well taught by Nelson Mandela and other iconic leaders like Oliver Tambo on how to continue to build a united nation out of the diverse groupings that we have in South Africa. We're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying, and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support, that is anti-transformation and anti-change, that would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid type of policies. And I said to him, I would never do that. I learned at the feet of Nelson Mandela, and we intend to proceed with the implementation of our constitutional architecture. And I thought in my conversation with him early in the morning at 4 o'clock South African time, he understood that. And I said, I'd like to come and meet him so that we can discuss this matter further. So those people who have fled are not being persecuted. They are not being, hounded. They are not being treated badly. And they are leaving ostensibly because they don't want to embrace the changes that are taking place in our country in accordance with our constitution. So we think that the American government has got the wrong end of the stick here, but we'll continue talking to them.
So a face-to-face meeting is coming up. Is Elon Musk invited when you have that face-to-face meeting?
Well, I don't know. They will determine whether Elon Musk is part of it or not. I will go with my own South African delegation.
Your Excellency, thank you so much, Your Excellencies. This has been wonderful. Thank you for your time, for your insights. Please give them a big round of applause.
This is the journey to One Africa.